You can find the scripture this morning on the front of today's bulletin, and that's taken from Psalm chapter 121. That's Psalm 121, verses 1 through 8. And my Bible may read slightly differently. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains. From where shall my help come? My help comes from Yahweh, who made heaven and earth. He will not allow your foot to stumble. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will not slumber and will not sleep. Yahweh is your keeper. Yahweh is your shade on your right hand. The sun will not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. Yahweh will keep you from all evil. He will keep your soul. Yahweh will keep your going out and your coming in from now until forever.
Good morning. It is good for us to be able to gather together and study from God's Word about a subject that we all have to face at some point, the subject of our own mortality, our death, the death of a loved one, the afterlife. All of those things are kind of wrapped up in the study that's being presented in the book that we're going through this year on what comes next. And that book is written by Park Linscomb, and we've already looked at the first 4 chapters of that book. And in those first 4 chapters, we've talked about kind of an introductory chapter, and then we talked about this life, the present life in which we live in, the physical world. And then we talked about death, the next chapter. And then these past 2 chapters introduce us to the topic of Hades or Sheol, as it's Sheol in the Old Testament or Hades in the New Testament. And so last month we looked at what was part 1 and kind of looked at the portrayal of Sheol or Hades in the Bible. And then today we're going to look at part 2, which is kind of examining a couple of questions that sometimes come up when we talk to people or that people may have about what that next life or that next existence is like. And remember, we haven't got to eternity yet. We haven't got beyond the judgment day yet when we reach that final form of existence or that final dispensation of where we will be at. But we're looking at that kind of an interim location or place where the dead go after their death and this physical world, this physical life is over. Where are they and what form of existence is there for them until that time of judgment? So that's kind of where we're at right now in our study. And if you have not been with us for that study, there's a picture of the book. We have a couple of copies of the book on the back table if you'd like to look at one. And think about purchasing one of those, and we have those available as well. But so we are ready for part 2 of our lesson today on Hades or Sheol. So we'll look at a few of those common questions. This isn't a comprehensive list. I'm sure people have questions that are not considered in the book or that we may not consider today about the afterlife, but we'll kind of summarize that thought at the end as well today. So first on our list of common questions that he addresses in the book is a question. He didn't word it quite this way, but I kind of paraphrased his question. But do the dead know about things pertaining to the world of the living? So once somebody has departed this life, this physical existence, they've passed through that gateway of death that we talked about a few months ago, and now they are in Hades. They're in that afterlife existence that is a place where they are to await the coming judgment. Do they have knowledge of the things that are going on in this life? Do they know about what our day-to-day routines are? Do they know about the things that we face or suffer? Do they know about our existence here? And I think this comes from perhaps a desire for us to be comforted in the loss of a loved one. It's comforting. I lost my dad about 5 years ago. I lost my mom less than a year ago, and it's comforting to me to be able to think about what would it be like to have a conversation with them? What would it be like in this current moment that I am facing right now? If I could talk to my dad, if I could seek advice from my mother, how would that conversation go? And to be able to have that conversation in my mind and think about, I wonder if in the next life, if they are aware of the things that are going on in my life right now. Are they able to celebrate, the milestones that my children are reaching right now and the things like that? And we have imagery for that kind of thing. So, there's I think it's probably a country song, that talks about holes in the floors of heaven, and somebody who has gone on and departed being able to kind of look down through the windows in the floor of heaven and being able to see the things that are going on in this life, and us taking comfort in that. And we hear in a common phrase that we might hear at a funeral or memorial service, or something to the effect of, they're looking down on us now, and they're part of our, they're cheering us on, or they're concerned about the things that are going on in our life. And I understand the desire for those thoughts and the comfort that those thoughts can bring. But let's look and see what the Bible says about the idea of those who have gone on having any kind of interaction with the things that are going on in this world. And I'm going to switch these two around in your, if you're looking at the outline for today. I'm going to take the Job 14 passage first and talk about that, because I think it's a little more obscure and a little more maybe speculative about the conclusions that we'll draw from that before we get into the other passage. And I just put there in your notes, Job 14, verse 21. But if you look back a little earlier in the chapter, and we know the experience that Job had, that he was living his life, that he was successful, that he was having a wonderful life, and then everything falls apart. Literally, everything falls apart. He loses his family, he loses his possessions, his health, all of that. And it's a test. It's a test to see if he will remain faithful. And so much of what happens and transpires after that is Job wrestling with the idea of remaining faithful. And what does it look like for him to remain faithful in the face of such loss? And if you look at verse 13 of Job chapter 14, he says, "Oh, that thou wouldst hide me in Sheol." And we talked about Sheol. That's the realm of the dead. He wants to pass through that gateway of death and enter into the realm of Sheol. He doesn't want this life anymore. This life hurts too much for the existence that he's living at this point. And then in verse 14 he says, "If a man dies, will he live again?" And he's again contemplating death. He's thinking about death. He's thinking about what comes next and what that would look like for him. And so he's in the throes in this speech of really wrestling with his own mortality and his own existence and how much pain he's in. So that kind of gives us the context then for the verses that I want us to look at, which is verses 20 and 21, where he says, "Thou dost forever overpower him, and he departs. Thou dost change his appearance and send him away. His sons achieve honor, but he does not know it. Or they become insignificant, but he does not perceive it." And so there, then again, as Job is contemplating what it would be like for him to depart this life, that God would overwhelm him and change his appearance, that he would leave this life, pass through that gateway of death into the next life. Then he says his sons would achieve honor and he wouldn't know it, or his sons would be insignificant and he wouldn't perceive it. Think about what Job has been through, and that he's lost his children, he's lost his sons, and the pain that he feels because of that. He says, if I had only been dead, if I had only been in the land of Sheol before that, then these things would have happened to my sons and I wouldn't have known it. I wouldn't be feeling or experiencing the pain that I'm feeling now because of the things that I'm going through. And so it seems to me there that Job at least has the understanding or the belief that once he passes through death into the next life, that there's no interaction with this life, that there's no perception or understanding of the things that are going on then in this world. So that's kind of our first passage, and really we don't have a lot of passages that we can look at that deal with this topic, but we have a couple, and let's look at 1 Samuel chapter 28. In 1 Samuel chapter 28, we have an interaction between King Saul near the end of his life with Samuel, who already has left this life. In 1 Samuel 28, Saul is facing a battle with the Philistines, and he is seeking seeking knowledge from the Lord. He wants the Lord to tell him what's going to happen, but by this point, the Lord has left Saul, and he is not going to respond to any of Saul's requests or Saul's pleas. And so Saul is left in the dark. He has no one to guide him, no one to instruct him about what to do. Is it going to be safe to go into battle with the Philistines or not? He doesn't know. And so he's seeking for knowledge. And so he sends his servants to find a spiritist, a medium, a soothsayer, a necromancer, somebody that can seek out for him a conversation with Samuel. And so we pick up the story there in 1 Samuel 28, verse 7. It says, Then Saul said to his servant, Seek for me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said to him, Behold, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. And Saul disguised himself, putting on other clothes, and went, he and 2 men with him. And they came to the woman by night. And he said, Conjure up for me, please, and bring up for me whom I shall name to you. The woman said to him, Behold, you know that what Saul has done, that he has cut off those who are mediums and spiritists from the land. Why are you then laying a snare for my life to bring about my death? And Saul vowed to her by the Lord, saying, As the Lord lives, there shall be no punishment come upon you for this thing. And the woman said, Whom shall I bring up? And he said, Bring up Samuel for me. When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul. And the king said to her, Do not be afraid, but what do you see? And the woman said to Saul, I see a divine being coming up out of the earth. And he said to her, What is his form? And she said, An old man is coming up, and he is wrapped with a robe. And Saul knew that it was Samuel, and he bowed with his face to the ground and did homage. And Samuel said to Saul, Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am greatly distressed, for the Philistines are waging war against me, and God has departed from me and answers me no more, either through prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may make known to me what I should do. Samuel said, Why then do you ask me, since the Lord has departed from you and has become your adversary? And the Lord has done accordingly as he spoke through me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to your neighbor David. And as you did not obey the Lord and did not execute his fierce wrath on Amalek, so that the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also give over Israel along with you into the hands of the Philistines. Therefore, tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. Indeed, the Lord will give over the army of the Israelites into the hands of the Philistines. And so we have this interaction, which is unique in the scriptures, of King Saul having interaction with Samuel after Samuel has died. Samuel is conjured up by this medium, by the spiritist, who evidently is as surprised as everyone else when he appears, because she is, shrieks. She screams out in surprise when Samuel actually appears. And so it would appear to me that she was a charlatan. She was not used to this happening. And the fact that Samuel, when he does appear, Saul doesn't see him. And he relies upon the woman to describe what is going on and what Samuel looks like to understand who is there, tells us that was the case for anyone who is a medium, anyone who is a spiritist, that when they conjured someone up, the normal people in the room couldn't see what was happening. They would rely upon the medium to then tell them what's going on. And so when she sees Samuel, she's alarmed, she's scared, she's surprised. But then when she is able to actually describe what Samuel looks like, Saul knows that she's telling the truth, that he actually is there. And then Samuel does speak to Saul, though we don't have any indication that Saul ever actually saw Samuel. He just heard the voice. And so there's a lot going on in this passage, but the question at hand is, do the dead know about the things pertaining to the world of the living? And what we get from this passage is that it doesn't seem that Samuel knows what the current events in the land of Israel are at this time, because he says, Saul, why am I here? Why did you bring me? What's going on? And Saul has to fill Samuel in on the details. And Samuel's initial remarks are nothing more than a reiteration of things that he's already told Saul. He had already told Saul before his own death that the kingdom was going to be stripped away from him, that it was going to be given to David. So when Samuel tells him that again, that's not anything related to what's going on in the current events. That's just a reiteration of the message hasn't changed. God has not changed his mind in stripping the kingdom away from you, not because of what's happening right now, but because of what happened some time back with the Amalekites. And so we have an indication here that Samuel has been unaware of the things that are developing or going on in the land of the Israelites after his own death. And the fact that Saul is able to have him conjured up doesn't change Samuel's ability to interact or have that knowledge until Saul tells him the things that are going on. Now, Samuel here is able to prophesy specifically about the events that take place, but remember that Samuel was a prophet. He was a prophet before his death, and he had routinely been given information by God pertaining to future events. And so this is nothing new for Samuel to be able to look at the things that are going on as he was made aware of the scenario and then be able to discern God's will in that circumstance. So it would appear to us then from the little bit of Bible knowledge that we have, or the Bible passages that we have, that there's an indication to us that the dead, as they have gone to Hades or Sheol, though they are conscious, though they are aware, though they do have memories of their own existence and their own time on earth, the indication would seem to be that once they have entered into that land, that realm of the dead, that they no longer have an understanding or a perception of the things that are taking place in this life. So that is the answer to that question, as it seems to come from the Bible, that the dead are unaware of this existence. The second question is also an interesting one. Are ghosts real? I'm waiting for someone to answer that one for me. Maybe. That's a great answer. Are ghosts real? Let's look at a couple of Bible passages and see what the Bible has to say about ghosts. Isaiah chapter 19, verse 3. Isaiah 19, verse 3 says, "Then the spirit of the Egyptians will be demoralized within them, and I will confound their strategy, so that they will resort to idols and ghosts of the dead and to mediums and spiritists." So God here speaking through Isaiah the prophet about Egypt and the judgment that he's going to bring upon Egypt as they are devolving and their society is crumbling around them because of the judgment that God has pronounced against them. They will get more and more outrageous in what they are seeking to be able to try to preserve their way of life, to try to preserve their country. And finally, it will get to the point that they will cry out to idols. Now, do we believe in idols? Are idols real? Well, I mean, you can carve an idol, but is the power or the God or the deity that idol is supposed to represent, do we give any credence to that at all? Do we believe that idol has any power or any ability whatsoever? Well, of course not. It doesn't. That's absurd. And he talks about mediums and spiritists. We already talked about, the medium that Saul went and saw. She was surprised when Samuel appeared. She didn't think it was going to happen. This has never happened before. And so she was a charlatan. And so our mediums, our spiritists, do they have any real power? Well, no. And then sandwiched right in between those things, Isaiah mentions ghosts of the dead. So would it make sense for Isaiah to talk about one thing, idols that have no power, no existence, and at the end to talk about mediums and spiritists that have no power, and then in the middle to mention ghosts, which are real? Well, he seems to be lumping all those things together there. And so if we say that idols and spiritists have no power, then it would seem to flow from that passage as well that ghosts are included in that category of things that have no real power or existence. Now, let's look at a couple of other interesting passages. Matthew chapter 14, verses 26 and 27. A familiar scene to us here. Jesus appears to his disciples walking on the water, and verse 26 there says, "When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, 'It is a ghost.' And they cried out in fear, but immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, 'Take courage, it is I, do not be afraid.'" And so they see Jesus walking on the water, and this physically that can't happen. Somebody with physical characteristics, physical appearance, weight, cannot walk on water. And so if we see a being that is walking on water, it can't be a physical being. It can't be a physical human person. And so because their only other frame of reference, their only other idea of what it can be is that it has to be some spiritual being, they immediately go to the idea of it being a ghost. Does this mean that ghosts exist because the disciples saw something and they blurted out, it must be a ghost? Well, there was another explanation. There was a more believable explanation in this case about what was going on. And so it wasn't that what they were seeing demonstrates for us the idea that there are ghosts. It was that when they thought they saw a ghost, there was a more believable, more acceptable explanation for what they were seeing. And that is that it was Jesus, who of course is not a physical being, or not purely physical, but was also God. And so he had control over that situation. So just because the disciples blurt out something in a moment of fear doesn't mean that they are testifying to the veracity or the truthfulness of that idea or that topic. They were corrected in their understanding by what Jesus demonstrated to them. Another interesting example is in Matthew chapter 17. And we'll not read this entire passage here, but Matthew 17, 1 through 13 is the story of the transfiguration of Jesus. And who was there with Jesus in his at the transfiguration? Well, it was Moses. Moses has been dead a long time. And it was Elijah. And Elijah, has he been dead a long time? Was he dead? That's a good question. Elijah obviously was no more. He was taken, but Elijah never died. And so if we think of a ghost being the spirit of somebody who died, I'm not sure Elijah gets to fit into that category anyway, but if we say, okay, well, he was now in the land that comes after the land of the living because he wasn't here anymore, so that kind of applies to him. Well, okay, maybe we can make an exception for Elijah. But the reason that we include this here is not because, well, now we know that there are ghosts, because Moses and Elijah were there. The reason we include this is to show the extreme circumstances surrounding the events that were taking place when two people who actually had passed into the next realm were here upon the earth. This was not something that was a regular, everyday occurrence. This was something that was so exceptional, that was so out of the ordinary, that the gospel writers include it as a story pertaining to the life of Christ. And so this is not a passage, I think, demonstrating to us that there are ghosts running around on the earth. This is a passage demonstrating to us that in a very unique, very awesome circumstance, that Jesus was able to bring to his side whomever he wished. And in this case, Moses and Elijah were the people with whom he wished to communicate. And so we have these couple of stories where we have references to ghosts, or we have references to people who have departed being able to make an appearance back here upon the earth, but those are the exception, not the rule. And so in many of the other passages that we'll look at just a couple. The Bible associates ghosts or seeking ghosts with pagan beliefs and pagan practices. Look at Leviticus 19, verse 31. Leviticus 19:31 says, "Do not turn to mediums or spiritists. Do not seek them out to be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God." And so what Saul did, it's interesting that Saul, the kingdom has been stripped from him. He's been condemned that he's not going to be the king anymore. And yet when the spiritist that he seeks out, the first thing she says is, Saul got rid of all of us. Well, they missed one because she's still there, but still she knows that Saul, even Saul, for all of his faults, had tried to follow through on this, at least some work in following through on this passage about ridding the land of spiritists and mediums, because those who seek the dead, those who seek for interaction and contact with ghosts, are not something that God wants his people to be involved in. So whether or not there are ghosts, seeking their presence, seeking their counsel is something that God tells his people not to be involved in. Look also in Leviticus 20, verse 6. Verse 20, verse 6 says, "As for the person who turns to mediums or to spiritists to play the harlot after them, I will also set my face against that person, and I will cut him off from among his people." So there again, the medium or the spiritist, those who would seek after the dead, They're the ones that God says, I will cut off from my people. They're like harlots. They're like prostitutes. They're supposed to be faithful to God. They're supposed to be seeking His presence. They're supposed to be seeking His counsel. And if they're refusing His counsel, refusing His presence, and they're going after counsel of the dead, then they have forsaken God. They have played the harlot against Him. And so, the few passages that we have seem to suggest that of the two times we know of in the Bible where somebody who had passed on, making an appearance on the land, that is Samuel, it was a surprise to the spiritist, and then Moses and Elijah with Jesus, that was the exception, not the rule. We know of no other cases where somebody who was dead making a spiritual appearance. Those just didn't happen. And for those who sought for those things to happen, they were to be cut off from their people. So some of this, as we get into some things, I know there may be people out there among us who, claim experiences or have had experiences that can't be explained or things along those lines. And what those experiences are, I'm not sure I could answer that, but I know what the Bible teaches. And the Bible teaches me not to seek those experiences, not to chase after those things. So that's what we need to stick with. Question 3, kind of related to the other two, maybe. If we think about, do the dead know what's taking place in this world, and can they make an appearance of some kind so that they can interact with this world in some way? Well, then can we use those interactions with the dead to be able to predict the future? That's a big thing if you try to talk about horoscopes or future telling or palm readers or anything like that today. They want to seek advice from those who have gone on because they supposedly have some kind of insight about what the future will hold for us. Well, again, our first reference here would be the interaction that we had with Samuel in 1 Samuel that we read just a moment ago. So Samuel told Saul what was going to happen, but Samuel was a prophet. He already knew what was going to happen and had told Saul in pretty great detail before his own death what was going to happen. And then what extra information there he gives, well, Samuel was a prophet, and Samuel had insight that most people were not going to have. He had that insight while he was alive, and he had that insight evidently after his own death. But let's look at another passage or two about this idea of the dead telling the future. Let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 18, beginning in verse 9. Deuteronomy 18, and we'll start in verse 9. Says, when you enter the land which the Lord your God gives you, you shall not learn to imitate the detestable things of those nations. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, one who uses divination or who practices witchcraft, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who casts a spell, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whoever does these things is detestable to the Lord, and because of these detestable things, the Lord your God will drive them out before you. You shall be blameless before the Lord your God. For those nations which you shall dispossess, listen to those who practice witchcraft and to diviners. But as for you, the Lord your God has not allowed you to do so. So, can the dead tell the future? Well, no. But even if they can, should we seek them out to try to discern the future? Well, no. God says you need to be seeking me. And that's it. And anything that we put in front of God becomes an idol. And so if we are seeking counsel from the dead, if we're seeking witchcraft or spiritists, or if we're seeking sorcery, or we're seeking all of those things that are listed, those are things which are by their nature designed to supplant God. They're designed to be a replacement for God, because we either don't like His answer that He's given us, or we don't trust Him enough, or we're just entertained or enamored with the idea of being able to communicate with the dead in some way. And so God clearly demonstrates to us and states for us that we're to leave those kind of things alone and not be involved in pursuing those kind of things. Look at also at Isaiah chapter 8. Isaiah 8, beginning in verse 19. Says, "And when they say to you, consult the mediums and the spiritists who whisper and mutter, should not a people consult their God? Should they consult the dead on behalf of the living? To the law and to the testimony. If they do not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. And they will pass through the land hard-pressed and famished, and it will turn out that when they are hungry, they will be enraged and curse their king and their God as they face upward. Then they will look to the earth and behold distress and darkness, the gloom of anguish, and they will be driven away into darkness." God here is you can hear the sarcasm, you can hear the incredulity in his voice, that it's ludicrous to consult the dead on behalf of the living. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's not a rational thing to do, to try and contact one who's passed from this life to find out about this life. Well, they're not here anymore. They're gone. They've gone on, and they don't have any reference, or they don't have any knowledge of the things that are going on in this life. Rather, he says, God is the one that we should seek. He says, should not a people consult their God? So can the dead tell the future? Well, no. But even if they could, it would be wrong for us to seek their counsel, because we should be seeking the counsel of God and God alone. The fourth question that he gets into deals with the doctrine of purgatory. Is purgatory real? And some people believe in this doctrine of there being a place where the dead go for a short period of time, or a period of time, to receive punishment for sins in this life, and then after they have been purged of their sin through the punishment that they're facing, that punishment will end, and then they can enter into eternity in heaven. So this teaching is largely based upon a passage from, we call it an apocryphal book. It's the book of 2nd Maccabees, chapter 12 of that book. If you want to go look it up on the internet and read through 2nd Maccabees chapter 12, you'll find some things there that seem to indicate a belief in suffering a period of torment, or a period of punishment for a short time, and then being able to enter into the promised land. But as far as the Bibles that we have, you'll not find any reference to, or any discussion of the idea of a temporary or partial punishment that can be faced by those who have gone on, those who are dead. And then once that period of punishment has ended, then they will enter into the eternal reward of the righteous. The passage that we looked at more in depth last month in Luke 19 with the rich man and Lazarus would seem to indicate to us that once you have passed out of this life and you're into the realm of the dead, into the Hadean world, that there it's fixed. It's permanent. That there is not going back and forth between either of those realms. There's a gulf fixed between torment and paradise, and there is no provision made for being able to cross from the one over to the other. And so purgatory itself, you can do a lot of reading on that if you choose to go more in depth to that, but suffice it to say for us today that there is just no New Testament or Old Testament reference that would seem to indicate to us that there is any teaching in the Bible that suggests that there is going to be a partial or a temporary punishment for people that then would be ushered into heaven. So that addresses a couple of common questions that you might get if you begin having a discussion with somebody about the topic of the afterlife. And they're hard. They're hard questions. They're hard because we just don't have a whole lot of biblical information or biblical passages to look at in regard to some of those things. And so we need to remember, as we look at our call to action today, first thing that we need to remember is this, that we have a keyhole view. Remember that illustration from the very beginning when he talked about the idea that as you look through a keyhole into a room, you can see little bits and pieces of the things that are available or going on in that room, but you can't really see everything. And so as we examine this topic of the afterlife, or what comes after this life, we're not going to have our answers we're not going to have all the answers that we would like to have. There are going to be questions that remain unanswered. But we need to remember a couple of things. First of all, Hades is temporary. Once we pass from this life through death into that next realm of existence before the Lord's return, that realm is temporary. It's not permanent. And so whatever our understanding is about the dead and where they are and how they exist and what's going on there, we don't have all the information we want, but we do know it's temporary. And it's not our final resting place. It's not the final say in what is going to happen. And though we don't know all that we would like to know about the next life, we know enough about that next life to be able to determine the things we do in this life. We know that what we do in this life matters. We know that it's what we do in this life that determines what that next life will be like. And so just because we don't have all the answers the way we would want the answers to be for that next life, we know enough to know that there is a permanent dwelling place for us. And we need to be spending this life preparing for that permanent dwelling place. And there are people in the world today who call themselves agnostics, who just say, well, there's just not enough information. I'm just going to kind of wait and see what happens because I don't know. I don't know enough about the next life or whether there even is a next life to know how I should live in this one. Well, that's not leading you to a place that you want to go. And we need to be people who understand that there is a next life. And it's what we do in this life that determines that next life. So this morning, as you think about that, as you consider what your life here is like and the decisions that you made, the commitments that you've made, think about it in terms not just of the here and now, not just the today, but think about it in terms of the next life. How have your decisions that you've made up to this point, how have they affected what's going to happen next? Because that's what really matters. And so this morning, if you have any need to bring before the congregation, if we can help you in any way, if we can study with you about what choices you need to make, we want to do that. If you would give us that chance, if you'll come while we stand and sing.